The Pac-12 hasn't won a bowl game in 2 years, and that's not very good. It's actually 2019, technically 2020, whatever you want to say. It's been too long. But though that has weakened the perception of the conference nationally, there are opportunities in the non-conference slate this year for the Pac-12 to get a little bit of its credibility, a little bit of its mojo back. Let's go.
Locked On Pac-12, your daily podcast on the Pac-12 Conference. It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On Pac-12. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin, D1 play-by-play broadcaster. Thanks for making this your first listen or your first view of the day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your number one source to stay up to date with the Conference of Champions. Like, comment, subscribe wherever you are listening to or watching this show. I appreciate all of you out there, of which there are hundreds, and I hope one day there will be thousands who have already done. So love to see the audience growing on this show because I love talking about the Pac-12. I mean, it is just a really fun thing to be able to do, quite frankly. I love engaging with all of you. And if you ever want to engage with me, you got 4 ways you can do that. You tweet with the hashtag AskLOP12. You can DM me at LO_Pac12 or at Smalls_55 is my personal account. Or you hop in the YouTube comments. If you're watching there and you ask me a question, get it answered for you right here on the show. I am more than happy to do all of that. Ask me anything about the Pac-12. Heck, if you want to ask me a live question, by all means. But anyhow, so it's a problem that the Pac-12 hasn't won a bowl game in the last 2 college football seasons. The last team to do so was Oregon in the 2020 Rose Bowl after the 2019 season. So 2 years, 3, however you want to look at it. It's been a long time. But one thing that's important to consider, and I've talked with other people who, discuss college football regularly, it's a fun word, about this is a lot of times, I think nowadays in college football, you see as much, if not even more hype around these, preseason, not, pre-conference season, I should say, non-conference games than you do bowl games. I'm still someone who is of the opinion that bowl season still matters because part of the reason the Pac-12 has a really negative national reputation is nobody has won a bowl game the last couple of seasons. That's definitely a part of it. Are they everything? No. Are they still something? Yes. So I very much enjoy them, but there are opportunities, and let's get to more of them because I've discussed a good amount of them. You can go back and listen to them on past episodes or watch on YouTube as well. But these are kind of beyond weeks 1 and 2. So week 3, right off the bat, you got Washington hosting Michigan State. Now, I don't have particularly high expectations for the Huskies this year because I think their program has a couple years to go in order to get back to a place where they can really contend. The betting markets don't tend to agree with me, but I'm just not as high on them this year. I think they lost a lot in the secondary, though they've had a propensity as a program to bring in good players there. But they have quarterback question marks, and they've got a new staff, and they've got I just think a number of talent deficiencies on the roster. Like there are some areas where they're good. I mean, having Jackson Kirkland on the offensive line should really help, but I think there are more questions than answers up there in Seattle at this point in time. But in week 3, Washington plays Michigan State, a team that went 11-2 in 2021 under former Colorado head coach and Georgia defensive coordinator Mel Tucker, who looks to be, and he got a big time extension. I think it was like 10 years, $95 million. It was a lot of money. He seems like a really good coach, but that's a lot of money. Here's the fascinating thing for Washington, because I'm not that high on them as a roster, but they have a very favorable early schedule. And the week 3 game against Michigan State is part of 4 consecutive home games they get to start the year. If you're a new coach coming into a Power 5 program that has fallen down and is looking to climb its way back up to the top of the conference, I don't know if there's a better way to start than 4 consecutive games at home. And Michigan State being in there, I mean, that would be a landmark win. It would completely prove me wrong. If Washington wins that game, I will look at them completely differently. I will come on here and say, all right, I was wrong. I underestimated them. I think it's going to be a tough game to win. They don't have Kenneth Walker anymore, but they did add Jarek Broussard, former Pac-12 freshman of the year at Colorado. So I think they're going to be able to run the ball just fine. But that's a huge opportunity. That is a really, really big one there. They've got Kent State and Portland State before they play the Spartans, so should be able to get a couple of wins there. They also should have beaten Montana a season ago, but it's a new staff, and I expect them to be more competent than they were last year. And then they have Stanford in week 4, so that's a big one. Here's another one, and this one feels kind of weird and random. In that same week, week 3, Cal goes at Notre Dame. You got a couple of defensively minded head coaches there, so there might not be a ton of points down there in South Bend, but Cal has to go at Notre Dame with a new quarterback. That might be a long day for the Golden Bears. It would be a major upset, and I would be pretty surprised if Cal wins the game. I think the one thing they have going for them is, though Notre Dame scored a lot of points in their Fiesta Bowl loss to Oklahoma State. I think it was the Fiesta Bowl. It might have been Sugar. I don't know. I'd have to go back and look. But they lost that game to Oklahoma State, and they did score a lot of points there. I feel like that's going to be a real low-scoring, grinded-out affair where, it could be a 24-10 final score. That's probably going to be – I'll go 27-10. I think that's 27-10 Notre Dame with a late touchdown in there to kind of seal the deal. But Cal on the road in week 3 with, probably Jack Plummer at quarterback, boy, that's asking a lot of that offense early, and they've struggled on that side of the ball majorly, and that could be a long day for the Golden Bears, but a significant opportunity. I've mentioned Colorado before. I have no lower. No, let me start that over and try and say it more coherently. There is not a team I have fewer expectations for in 2022 than Colorado. I think they could very easily go 2-10. Now, maybe they repeat and go 4-8. I think that would be a good season considering the transfers that they've had and, just kind of what the state of their roster is right now for Carl Durrell and company. But part of the reason they could go 2-10, in my view, is that they could start 0-3 very easily. They've got TCU at home. Then they go at Air Force and at Minnesota. There's no layups in there. I mean, that's a really brutal non-conference schedule, especially for Colorado. Do not have a lot of hopes or a lot of high hopes, I should say, that they're going to, be able to pull that off. One game that, Oregon's got the biggest non-conference game, probably. Well, Utah going down to Florida, I think, is also right there. But Oregon's got the reigning national champions in Georgia, and that's in week 1, and that's just that's a rude introduction to being a head coach if you're Dan Lanning, but at least it's against his old team, so give Oregon a chance, but I wouldn't give him a great chance. Though I didn't give him much of a chance last year against Ohio State either. But in week 3, they've got BYU. And I think a lot of Pac-12 fans out there should know by now that BYU is not a team to be taken lightly because they believe they beat, if memory serves, 5 Pac-12 teams a season ago, including Utah. Yeah, that's not a game, even though it's at Autzen Stadium, where Oregon has been very, very tough over the years. That's not a game that the Ducks can afford to take lightly. So that's it for the early season non-conference. What about the later season non-conference? I'll tell you about those, but first I remind you that our friends at Built, they're always coming out with amazing new flavors. And guess what? They have done it again. Introducing the Mud Pie Bar and the Mud Pie Puff. Not sure what mud pie tastes like? Well, if you're a chocolate fan, you better sit down for this because the new Mud Pie Bar is rich whipped cream and chocolate mousse. Oh, such a good combo. Smothered in 100% real chocolate, topped with cookies and cream, crumble, and of course, it's 150 calories, only 8 grams of sugar, and loaded with protein as well. Go get yours right now. Go to Built.com. Use promo code LOCK15. Get 15% off your order. That's promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at Built.com. So I mentioned Notre Dame earlier, and they will actually play 3 Pac-12 teams this year. They got Cal in week 3. Then in week 7, the traditional game against Stanford. That one also in South Bend. The only time Notre Dame has to go on the road against a Pac-12 opponent is against USC in Week 13. If the conference as a whole, right, you're looking at Stanford, USC, and Cal. If those California schools can go 1-2 against Notre Dame, that'd be fine. But if you can find a way to go 2-1, I think that would go a long ways because Marcus Freeman has got a lot of hype on the national level, and deservedly so. He showed a lot from a galvanizing standpoint as a head coach. The players seem to like him. He's been very well respected and well liked in that building and in that football program for the last several years. Expectations there are pretty high. If Cal loses, but if Stanford is able to have a bounce back year and USC is able to win that game, which I think is one of the toughest on their schedule, and it's really good that they're able to get it at home. I think their only tougher game this year is probably Utah, and that's, I don't remember what week that is off the top of my head, but if the Pac-12 goes 2-1 against Notre Dame this year, I think that's a great place for the conference to be when you look at, non-conference opportunities this year. And speaking of BYU, Stanford, because they play non-conference games all over the place, they just do. Most teams go 3 non-conference and then 9 conference games. Stanford and USC both mix it up a little. Just the way it is. I'm sure there are historical broadcasting media rights reasons and, the big-time national powers. There's just all sorts of things in play there as to why that's the case. But I look at that Week 13 game. A couple good ones there. Stanford, BYU. Again, we'll see where Stanford's at in their season, but that could be a really nice way for them to start rounding out their 2022 college football campaign. If they can pick up a win against BYU, it's always solid. It's never, program changing, but it's always a win where you look and you go, okay, that's pretty good. We're doing well. But I look at that Week 13 game, USC and Notre Dame. Those are 2 of the biggest names in the history of college football. And depending on how things play out, I think that could be the game that really puts into focus for everybody the idea that the Pac-12 is back as being a more legitimate conference on a national scale. Because if you go into that game and Notre Dame and USC are both around the 9-10 win mark at that point in their seasons, that's going to be a college game day game, and it will be a massive spectacle. The Coliseum will sell out for that one. And it will feel bigger than any Pac-12 college football game has felt in probably a decade. You would be hard-pressed to, not that there haven't been great games, right? I'm sure people will hop in the comments and say, oh, what about this game? What about that one? You can't duplicate the national power of USC and Notre Dame. And if they both go into that, say Notre Dame beats Cal and beats Stanford and is rolling in at, 9 or 10 wins going into that game against USC, that's going to be the talk, not just of the conference. That's going to be the talk of the country. Everyone will want to see that because everyone wants to see, is Lincoln Riley really going to be able to jumpstart USC that fast? And if they beat Notre Dame, a good Notre Dame team on that stage, man, that will be, gosh, that could be big. I get excited just thinking about it. I really hope that game is what we want, but it's not a guarantee, right? It's not like a week 1, 2, or 3 game where, you have a pretty good idea of what the records are going to be. It's not like a Georgia, Oregon, or a Utah, Florida, where you say, okay, you're going into week 1 and you just set the tone for the rest of the season, or at least first few weeks of the season, and then maybe you have a couple stumbles along the way, which has been known to happen in college football. But that Week 13 game, that could be big time for the Pac-12. Okay, let's continue with our Pac-12 coaching evaluations. And now we're moving into the new hires department. And I'm going to do this for Jake Dickert as well, not today because I just talked about him recently, but he's kind of a new hire and he's kind of already been a coach. But the 4 new hires in the conference this year: Lincoln Riley, Dan Lanning, Kalen DeBoer, and Jake Dickert at USC, Oregon, Washington, and Washington State, respectively. We'll begin today with Lincoln Riley. And the way that I'm framing these coaching evaluations in terms of the hires, giving them an overall grade, coaching pedigree, kind of the background, where he was, what sort of teams he had to work with, how successful he was, that sort of stuff. Recruiting expectations, not how he recruited before, though that will factor into the grade a little bit. But, what do I expect from the school now? And if I, see a hire and don't expect that the recruiting is going to elevate that much, that's going to tend to get a lower grade, because you want to bring in a coach, in theory, that has the ability to raise the recruiting profile of your school. Then I'll look at the state of the program, kind of the biggest challenges that they're facing, and then just kind of the overall team profile with the new head coach and how it feels. So, shocking though this may be, lots of good news here with regards to Lincoln Riley going to USC. Overall, it's an A. I mean, it's an overall A hire. The only reason it's not an A plus is because he hasn't yet, in his 5 seasons as a head coach, been to a national championship game. That's the only thing that's stopping it, because you have to have some leeway on the other side if somehow you had hired Nick Saban or Dabo Swinney or Urban Meyer, right? I mean, that would be, those are 3 of the best college football coaches of the last 15, 20 years or so. And so he's an A overall, but the national championship is literally all he's missing. He's got conference championships. He's got, a bunch of 10-win seasons. I mean, they're a player, and they've been to the college football playoff, or Oklahoma has, that is under his leadership. And, he's never had Lincoln Riley. This is why, coaching pedigree perspective, he gets an A. He's never had a full college football season where he hasn't won 10 games as a head coach. He went 10-2, then left Oklahoma prior to the bowl game. Bob Stoops came in and got the Sooners to an 11-win season when they trounced Oregon. It was like 30-3 or something. I mean, it was really not close. Part of a bad bowl season for the Pac-12, as I was alluding to earlier. But he's just done nothing but win games. And I'll get to his biggest challenge and a little bit of context there, which is, kind of the toughest area for him coming in. But recruiting expectations, I've got them sitting in an A-. And by the way, I'm grading this on the same curve, the same, kind of rigorous and toughness as before with the coaching evaluations, not handing out A's and A- here just for fun. Like, C is average. If I think you're average or slightly above average, I give you C is C+. And that's fine. It's not a dig. If you're in the B category, B- to a B+, then you're doing things pretty solidly above average. And if you're in the A's, then you're doing outstanding, at least in my eyes. I've got recruiting expectations at an A- here. And a question that, has been tossed around, I won't say a ton, but I mean, it's come into the minds of USC fans, I'm sure, and we've all thought about it one time or another, is, could USC have the top recruiting class in the country? I've seen some of you in the YouTube comments say, like, oh, they could, get the number 1 class in the country. I mean, they could certainly be number 1 in the Pac-12, going toe-to-toe with Oregon now going forward. And I think that that's something that is very, very attainable. But could they get to number 1 in the country? It's tough. Even at USC, even with the national brand power that's there, it's really tough, because it's not like Georgia and Alabama are slowing down, or Texas A&M. So I understand that, some Trojans fans might have that goal or expectation, but I don't expect him to be able to get to number 1 in the country. And I don't think he needs to get there, right? To get to the college football playoff. He wasn't doing that at Oklahoma, right? He had top 10 caliber classes, which is 100% where he should be beginning in the class of 2023. Those should be top 10 classes, or, maybe sneaking into the top 5 going forward. But can I sit here and say, like, oh, he's got to get to number 1, or he's not recruiting well enough? Like, no, that's not a reasonable way to approach it. But top 10, 100% expectation. By the way, speaking of USC recruiting, over the last weekend, whenever you're listening to this, I was at that overtime 7-on-7 camp down there and checking out some of the top prospects and recruits in the country. A number of players stood out. One of them, the number 1 guy who stood out to me down there, was Malachi Nelson. And he's the number 2 rated quarterback in the class of 2023. I'm not so sure he isn't number 1, and Arch Manning is only number 1 because his last name is Manning. Not that he isn't a good prospect, but Malachi Nelson is a dude. Guy, from a physical gift standpoint, if you think he pops off the screen when you look at his YouTube highlights, when you see him in person, he's towering over everybody. But he's not like, Nico Iamaleava, 5-star who's committed to Tennessee. He's not thin. He's built, but he is agile. His arm is ridiculously strong. His motion is quick. He's got a lot of zip on it. He had a move. It's 7-on-7. You can blitz, I think, once per set of downs, which is the way my friends and I played backyard football growing up and in like Oswego, Oregon. But anyway, you get one blitz per set of downs, and he got blitzed from the backside by someone who I believe was a DB, maybe a linebacker, but probably a DB, corner or safety. And he did a Michael Vick spin move where he pirouettes away in like less than half of a second, rolls out to his left and throws the ball in the money. It was one of the most impressive plays from a quarterback I've ever seen live. Pads, no pads, 7-on-7, whatever. It was ridiculous. That guy's going to the league. Let's get to the final two things here with Lincoln Riley's evaluation from a hiring standpoint. And that's the state of the program. Now, this is not as much a reflection on the coach, but it does, kind of give you an idea of what the expectations should be in terms of, how quick the turnaround should be. Because if you're making a new hire, generally it's because your program wasn't living up to the standard that you were setting before. It's not always the case, but it is often the case. Far more often than not, unless you have a coach, leave your program after some success and go somewhere else. But I think right now, the state of the program and looking at the biggest challenge for USC puts this at a B-, meaning it's, not incredibly hard for Lincoln. Like right now, I'd say USC is about at a B-. I know for a lot of Trojan fans, after 4-8 in 2021, kind of feels like an F. I totally get that. The reality is it could still be a lot worse. But the reason that I think this is the toughest area for Lincoln Riley is twofold. Number one, he has to do something that he didn't have to do at Oklahoma, and that is rebuild a program. Now, the transfer portal is going to help him, and we've seen, the potential that they have there and the players that they have brought in. That's not going to do anything negative for USC. It's all positive there. But when Lincoln Riley was named the head coach at Oklahoma, he was taking over a program led by Bob Stoops that was a perennial power in college football, year in and year out, and he continued on that momentum train and even brought it to new heights and expectations and whatnot, specifically on the offensive side of the ball. But this is still a new challenge for him. But is it an impossible challenge? No, that's why this is not, a C- or a D+, like, Jed Fish coming into Arizona. That would have been probably an F, right? I mean, that would have been, they've lost 8 straight games coming in or 12 straight games as a program when he took over. That's what an F would look like. So I don't think that it's going to be easy for Lincoln Riley, because you not only have to, do something you haven't really done before, and that's rebuild a program after it has fallen down on tough times. But the other thing is the expectations couldn't be higher. At Oklahoma, yep, there were expectations, but the infrastructure for having a really successful program was there. He now has to build that himself, and the expectations are, I would say, even higher at USC. And any sort of stumble, any sort of, shortcoming, I think is going to be magnified, because USC gets a lot of national media attention and the fans are very passionate and they're very tied into the program. And now that he's there with the coaching pedigree that he brings in, the expectations are sky high. And I think that that's another thing that's going to be tough for him, just to have to deal with in the, what am I trying to say? He's not going to win every game. And so one thing that he'll have to, deal with as a coach is, I think, when you lose at USC and the expectations and the hype that's being built around the program are even greater than what he had when he was at Oklahoma. You lose at Oklahoma, yeah, it's a big deal. Fans are not happy, but I think it's even worse at USC, and that factors into the sort of culture that you can establish with your players and in the locker room. And I think that's something that should not go overlooked. Last thing here, how much does the hire raise your team's profile? Yeah, that's a pretty easy A+. I don't think. Maybe it should be an A because it's not an accept, but I mean, I don't know how much more attention USC and Lincoln Riley can get, and if the Trojans had hired like a James Franklin, this would probably be a B to B plus, where people say, all right, this is a good hire, he's a good coach, and he should be able to, bring him back from 4-8 and such, like he did at Vanderbilt and Penn State. But it's different when it's Lincoln Riley, and the profile of the school, I think, has been re-elevated. Now he's got to show it on the field, right? They have to have the results to match it, but so far at this point in his tenure and when he was hired as well, it was the story in college football, and you really can't raise your team's profile a whole heck of a lot higher than that, even at a place like USC. I appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time, and have a wonderful rest of your day.